please welcome Dennis Pilarinos, right?
Close enough.
Close enough, close enough. Well, I'm really bad to pronounce our names, sorry. And I have even one difficult one.
Oh, yeah.
But at least mine I can pronounce it, so sorry for that.
No problem.
He's going to introduce, I guess, Bodybuild,
Yeah.
which is a really cool tool. So please welcome in on the stage and listen carefully because it's really awesome.
Cool. Good morning. Can everyone hear me okay? Yeah? How about the hangovers? How are they feeling this morning? So? Yeah, all the guys in the front are all like, super tired. Thank you very much. My name's Dennis Pilarinos. I'm from Vancouver, Canada. So I will try to speak slowly, but I speak quickly. And I have a funny accent, I'm sure, to you. That's the Canadian part of it. I'm the founder of BuddyBuild. Who's familiar with BuddyBuild in the audience, really quickly? Oh, wow, 25%. Awesome. That sounds good. If you're not familiar with it, BuddyBuild is a continuous integration and continuous deployment service built specifically for mobile development teams. It's pretty interesting at BuddyBuild. We have a very unique view into the industry. We see thousands and thousands of teams every single day as they build their mobile apps. And so what I thought I would do is actually share some of the data. I thought that was pretty relevant. I don't know if she's here this morning. I don't see her. But it's anonymized data, and we get permission from the customers that we talk to and so on and so forth. But share some of this data to help inform the decisions that you have to make as you're building your mobile applications. So I thought that might be kind of interesting, and I'd love to get your feedback. So let's dive in. So for a moment, let's completely forget about mobile. Let's forget about if you're iOS or Android. Actually, really quickly, who here is an iOS developer? About 3/4-ish Android? Yeah, maybe 2/3-ish in the iOS side. Who's both? Yeah, okay, that's right. Perfect. So irrespective of what you're building, how you build software is largely the same. So if you think about it, software is really an interplay between two groups of people. And this is probably going to be obvious to the people in the room, but it's a good starting point. So really, it's a group of people who build the software and the people that they're building it for. And so what happens is you have designers, developers, product managers who get together and want to create something. At a certain point, at a certain time, they're ready to go and share it. And so they want to distribute that piece of software to some folks. And then they're going to ask those people that they're building the software for to test it. And there's really broadly two types of testing. There's explicit types of tests where I might say like, hey, what do you think of this font? Or what do you think of this color? And then there's implicit types of tests. So every single day, as it turns out, as we browse the web, we participate in implicit testing. We make decisions on websites based on how that website is presented to us. A classic example, at my time at Amazon, one of the things that we would test is the location and the color of the Buy It Now button. So on one of the product detail pages, it would be placed in different pages, and based on how these pages would convert, we would start to get information on that test, and we would optimize where those buttons would be placed. So once you have that data, ultimately it comes back as a series of feedback. The person might say, you know what, this font really works for me, or I'm red-green colorblind and it's really hard to read that UI, or a button might convert better on a web page. And so you take that feedback and you go and fix those issues. Does that make sense so far? Pretty straightforward? Great. Now, if you think about it, in order to build software that way, in order to really kind of make those loops go very, very quickly and be able to iterate quickly, what you ultimately need is a series of systems. You need a continuous integration system, you need a continuous deployment system, you need some way of getting feedback, and an analytics and kind of crash reporting system. And so how many folks here are web developers? Like 12? Perfect. But if you're a web developer, this is a fairly well understood and well solved problem. However, for mobile, it actually turns out to be quite different. What you find is that it's often pretty complex and cumbersome to set up a CI system. It's pretty difficult to provision users, specifically if you're an iOS developer. The feedback that you get is often inefficient and ambiguous. And so one of the projects that I worked on in the past was building the web browser for the Kindle. And so Jeff Bezos was an active beta tester for that application. And on Friday, we would send him an email with the latest build. And one Saturday or Sunday, he sent me an email that says, I don't like this menu. And so when you're building a web browser and he says, I don't like this menu, there's a bunch of ambiguity as to which menu he's talking about, right? Is he talking about the menu on Amazon.com, the web page that he's browsing, or is he talking about the menu in the browser? So that's the type of feedback that's really unactionable if you're a developer. And so that's an example of kind of feedback being broken for mobile. And obviously, the analytics and crash reporting that you get sometimes is lacking context that's helpful in debugging that issue. Now, the question is, well, why is that? Why is that the case? And in my opinion, there's really kind of two reasons. One, what you have is this ecosystem of one-off solutions. So you have solutions that solve, parts of the problem. So you'll find something that solves the CI part, maybe that solves the CD part, helps you with feedback or crash reporting, but they don't all work together seamlessly. And so you spend a lot of time trying to configure that. The other thing is a lot of these solutions weren't built for mobile. They were built for web, and people have retrofitted or tried to reuse these technologies or in these platforms in order to meet the needs of mobile. Let's take a look at what an example would look like if you're trying to get these two systems to work together. This is a fairly common blog post. It's actually one of the top Google search results when you look for the search for the terms Jenkins and TestFlight. And it's a tutorial that's 19 pages long. The author is actually this quote at the front, which says, "Wow, that's been quite the journey." So the person who wrote the blog post says that it's quite painful. And then they say, in the comments, you'll see hey, it's about 10 hours of Googling cryptic error messages. It sucks. You can write off the rest of your week. And this was kind of the state of affairs. Does that make sense so far? Great. Now, these are just some of the challenges that we face, just wiring your CI and CD solution. But you have to make thousands and thousands of decisions as you're building your application. Process questions like do you use Git flow or do you use a different variant for how you actually work with pull requests and your workflow? Tools questions like where do you store your source code? So I'm curious in here, how many people use GitHub? Great. And how many people use Bitbucket? And how many people use GitLab? So it's I would say for those, because I'm the only person who can see it, but I would say it's 40, 40, 20. That's what it looks like. So it's kind of interesting to be well, where do people store their source code? What are the advantages and disadvantages of it? Language and framework questions. These are decisions that you have to make. How many people use CocoaPods? How many people use Carthage? How many people use neither? Interesting. How many people didn't respond to the question? Perfect. I feel like I missed an answer for you. And thinking about questions like when should you be moving different versions of Swift? So there's thousands and thousands of questions that you have to take into consideration. And in a moment, what I'm going to do is share the data that helps you answer some of these questions. Make sense? First, what I thought I would do is give you some context. I'm going to show you a little bit about Buddy Build and hopefully give you an understanding of how we're able to gather that data. Sound like a good idea? Perfect. I'm going to put this down. So the context I'm going to give you is actually a very straightforward demo. Can you see this okay? So what we're going to do in this demo is pretty straightforward. We're going to onboard an application. I'm going to distribute it, and so I'm going to need a volunteer. And then we're actually going to get a piece of feedback from that user and fix a bug for them, all in about 10 minutes or so, 10 to 15 minutes. So the first thing I'm going to do is log in with GitHub. And so Buddy Build supports GitHub, Bitbucket, GitLab, both the .com versions and the on-premise versions. So if you're using GitHub Enterprise as an example. And what happens when you log in, the first thing you see is really a prompt for you to start onboarding one of your applications. One of the design principles that we took into Buddy Build is really trying to alleviate a lot of the complexity that's associated with setting up a CI solution. So what you see here are the organizations that I belong to, and within those organizations, the apps that I can go and build. And specifically, these are the repos that house those apps. So what I'm going to do is select a game called 2048. Are people familiar with this game? 2048, yeah, handful of heads are nodding. And I'm just going to hit build. Now, this project knows nothing about Buddy Build. It's literally a vanilla Xcode project. There's no scripts, there's no YAMLs, nothing. It's just the standard Xcode project. And what's happening is Buddy Build is provisioning the physical infrastructure that's required to do a build. So we have a couple of data centers with a ton of Macs. We spin up a virtual machine, and then we start pulling the source code down to do a series of analysis to go and figure out that project, or to figure out how to go and build that project. So literally goes from just choosing a repo that you want to build, going literally from the metal all the way to the application in order for that process to happen. Excuse me. So what you'll see here is an inference engine that we've built. So Buddy Build knows nothing about this project. It doesn't know if you're using CocoaPods or Carthage. It doesn't know which version of Xcode, and so we infer all of that for you on your behalf. So in this case, we decide to use Xcode 8.2.1 from the master branch. If I'm using CocoaPods or if I'm using Carthage, it'll automatically go and pull those things down, and it gets the virtual machine in a place where it can actually go and do the build. I didn't have to specify all of that. Buddy Build just automatically goes and figures it out. Once the machine is in a place where it can do the build, as you can see, what you get is the terminal output of the actual build itself. Excuse me. And so for 98.3%, last time I looked at the metrics, which was yesterday, 98.3% of the time, we just get that right. I think Peter was onboarding one of his apps yesterday, and we happened to get it wrong for him, of course. But that's literally the onboarding flow for most applications. Make sense? Yeah? Cool. The next thing we're going to do, now that we have the CI solution kind of set up, is actually distribute a build. So I'm going to need a volunteer. Is there anyone here with an iOS device? All right, come on up. So we're going to, there's really 3 steps, and we'll take just 1 second here. There's 3 steps in order to get this build onto this device. So what we've done is created a simulator build, and what we need to do is actually now transition that to a device build. How many people here would consider themselves code signing experts? 1 person? There's like, yeah, oh, 2. There's like 1.5. His friend is volunteering him as a code signing expert, which is pretty amazing. And so, yeah, that's fairly consistent. Of a group of like 200-ish, 250 people, there's 1.5 people who would consider them code signing experts. So here's kind of how that, to give you a sense for what you would need to do at this point, there's really 2 ways of basically getting these two files. So what you need is to upload the provisioning profiles and code signing identity. And so code signing identity is nothing more than a digital signature. It's a certificate that says that Dennis is the person who authored this application. So that's one artifact. The other artifact is a provisioning profile. And the provisioning profile is nothing more than a whitelist of devices that can install the build. And so this is what that would normally look like. You'd have to go to the keychain, you have to find the certificate, you have to export it, put a password in it, and send it up to Buddy Build. And then you have to probably search between, I think we looked at the metrics, it's around 80 to 120 provisioning profiles in a directory. So you have to find the right one and send it to us as well. And so that's the manual way, and some people really like getting into those details. Specifically for this, it's not something that people like spending a lot of time on. And so we've built a tool that automates that entire experience again. And so what's happening here is Buddy Build knows what code signing, identity, and provisioning profile are required. So it automates all those steps. It went into the keychain, found the certificate, exported it, and then securely transmitted it to Buddy Build. And all you have to do is like literally copy and paste that. To give you a sense for it, like less than 0.1% of people get the manual way right the first time. It's like, so it's infinitesimally small. In fact, when they do, I get a Slack message so I can reach out to them because I want to see who that 1 person is of 250 or what have you. It's super small. Okay, so now we've created a build. We've actually uploaded all the certificates, and now we're going to distribute it. Do you want to type in your email address here? There you go. And so Niels is going to get an email in about a minute and a half, and we're going to see that experience for him. So we're going to kick off a device build. He's going to get an email, and then we're going to install that build. And so while that's happening, what we'll do is we'll walk through the deployment aspects of Buddy Build. Really, with Buddy Build, you can deploy in 2 ways. One is an email-based, and the other one is to the play, or in this case, iTunes Connect, Play Store or App Store effectively. And so within the context of our email-based deployment system, what you can actually do is specify the list of people who are going to get the build. Then you can specify the frequency at which they're going to get it. And so you can say every time there's a build available. You can schedule times. This is one of the features that's kind of nice. It knows exactly the time zone that I'm in, which is helpful. But I could say, you know what, every Friday at 3 o'clock in the morning, send this build off to this group of people. Or you can just have a flat list of people that you want to distribute builds to. And so the idea is that you can specify the group of people, the frequency at which it deploys from, where it deploys from, so which branches that you might want to deploy from, and then which scheme that you want to use. In this case, what you often find is that people have multiple teams. They'll probably have a set of external stakeholders that they deploy to maybe once a week or once every 2 weeks, and then a group of internal stakeholders, maybe a feature team that they're deploying to on a very, very regular basis. So let's go ahead and see where that build's at right now. We'll open this up. Take a look at the logs, and it looks like it's just doing its last stages. But Buddy Build will deploy both, again, in that email-based deployment system, and you can use it to push directly to iTunes Connect. So if you want to use test flight, or if you want to use, or if you, when your app is ready for production, you can push it directly to the App Store or to the Play Store if you're an Android developer. Okay, while that's going, I know that this is going to crash. So this is QuickTime.
Yeah.
Let's see. Let's see if we do this. No one wants to see that. Hold on. So QuickTime can be finicky. What we're going to see if we can get Neil's phone on here. There it is. Okay, go ahead and check your email. There it is. And so what we're going to do is go through this one-time provisioning process. And so for the code signing experts, what are we expecting to happen here? So he's going to register his device so that we know that Niels' device and that email address are tied together. So go ahead and install it. If you want, I'll disconnect here. So if you have a password, do you have a password on your, go ahead and click install. Yes, sure. Here, we'll disconnect it here really quickly so you can't see it. So he's just going to do that.
Yeah.
Go ahead and click install. Now we're going to get QuickTime to reconnect again. In theory, no, it doesn't like that. If anyone has a better solution for this, I'd love to hear it after the talk. Okay, go ahead. So he's going to install that certificate. And 2048 can't be installed. Who knows why? Any guesses? Yeah?
You need to have individual icons listed.
Right, so the provisioning profile, that's basically what we were saying. The provisioning profile doesn't have his device ID, right? I never connected his device into my computer. I never went and sent that to the Apple Developer Portal. And so what would normally need to happen is I would have to go to the Apple Developer Portal, add the device, regenerate the provisioning profile, re-sign the binary, and then resend it to him. And so, like, even if you're a pro, that's very easy to get wrong. So I have to take this UDID, I have to get that from him. I have an email with it now, which is handy. But then I have to go through all those manual steps. Instead, let me see if I can put this here. Cool. What I'm going to do is turn on an integration that we have with the Apple Developer Portal. And so, once this is enabled, what BuddyBuild can do is automate all of those steps for me as well. I'm going to go back here. Go ahead and hit refresh. And so now what's happening is BuddyBuild is auto-provisioning that device on the fly. So as a developer, if I'm using this integration, then Niels gets a very different experience. He doesn't get that 2048 message, can't be installed. He gets this little spinner that says, like, hey, go ahead and install the build. So in the background, what BuddyBuild is doing is automating all of those steps. It's going to the developer portal, adding the device, regenerating the provisioning profile, and making it available for him to download. Make sense? Yeah? Okay, go ahead and hit download and install. and there's 2048 on his device. Go ahead and click OK for now. And so if you think about it, we set up the CI solution, we made it pretty easy to get that deployment out, and now what we want him to do is play 2048 and get distracted, which is fairly common in this demo. Instead, what we'd like him to do is give us a piece of feedback. So go ahead and take a screenshot. And there's a little tutorial that tells him how to give the development team feedback. So select the screen. Oh, you have to take the, you have to go back into the,
Take a screenshot again.
yeah, take the screenshot. There's the instructions in case you got it wrong. Type in whatever feedback you'd like. High number indeed. Okay, so if I go back to Buddy Build now, I click feedback, I can actually see the feedback that he sent me. So I can see the feedback, I can see what he sent, and then I get a bunch of different metadata that helps me really get context for what he was actually going and doing, right? I can see that he's running 10.3.1, that he's on a 7 plus. As it turns out, 7 plus versus 7s have different characteristics often. We can see a whole bunch of metadata that we get that helps us reproduce this issue. So we've kind of closed the loop. We've onboarded the app, deployed it, and asked him for an explicit piece of feedback. Now, one of the things that we recognize is that like this tool is going to sit within a broader kind of tool chain. That you probably have a bug tracking system, and this is a bug effectively. So what we're going to do. Actually, just before you do that, so what we'll do is I'm going to turn on this integration. I'm going to turn on GitHub issues for this purposes of this conversation, but Jira, Pivotal Tracker, Trello, Asana coming shortly are all features that you can do. Go ahead and hit settings.
Oops.
Okay, sorry. And so the app crashed. Go ahead.
Let's do it again.
Yeah. Crashes the app. Launch it again. Go ahead and take a screenshot, or actually make a couple of moves first. So cancel out of that.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Take a screenshot and select the region of the screen, whatever you want, and type some more. Crashes. Everyone wants to demo the emojis. That was a bug at one point. What I'm going to have, like it used to crash Buddy Build on the back end. We didn't parse it correctly. I remember that. I'll never forget it. Actually, what I'm going to have you do is I'm just going to disconnect your phone for a second. Now, make a bunch of more moves. Go ahead, yeah, move. Hit settings again. Now launch it again. Take another piece of, take another screenshot. Crashes part 2 or whatever you want, yeah. So you can see this is his second piece of feedback. Well, that's his first, that's his second, this is his third piece of feedback. If I click into these, I can see that we've opened up a new GitHub issue automatically. So Buddy Build now goes and opens GitHub issues, right? If I open it, I can see again, this is just a new ticket in Jira or a new GitHub issue in GitHub. I can see who opened it, what they said, what the specific screenshot was, and all the device metadata that helps me track these issues. If I go back now to builds, I can see that this build has been launched, that a user's actually used it. If I click into it, excuse me, I can see a bunch of metadata around like how long it took for the build to happen, that it was launched by one person, that there's been 3 pieces of feedback. I suspect in a few seconds here this will fill in with the actual number of crash reports, how many non-crashing sessions this app has actually had. So one of the things that's actually really interesting in knowing, if I click to this deploy tab, I can see that it was sent to myself and Niels, but I didn't download it or launched it, but he has. So just because a person installs it doesn't mean that they've used it extensively. So getting a sense for how much time they've actually used is what this feature actually does here. Let's see if the crash reports are there. Here they are. And so crash reporting is a type of implicit feedback, right? A user uses your application, something bad happens, they didn't do anything specifically to give you that feedback. And so as you'd expect with most crash reporting solutions, you get the call stack. One of the things that Buddy Build can do is actually show you the exact line of code that caused the crash. So we can go for a specific commit and say like, here's the source code that shows that exact crash, which makes it a lot easier to debug issues. It gives you context. Further, I can actually see what Niels was doing in order to get that to crash. And so let's see if this works. Yeah. And so you can see the actual touch targets in the games that he was playing all the way up to the crash itself. So if you want to see that again, again, it's attached to a crash report. Each one of those blue dots are the moves that Niels was making as he was playing the game right up to him hitting the settings, which caused the app to crash. Make sense? Yeah. Let's thank Niels for his work. So I want to make sure he gets a working version of the app. It's super straightforward at this point. Here's a specific line of code that caused the crash. I'm just going to comment it out. And I'm going to push the change. Oh, I got to get into the right thing. So I'm going to push this change to GitHub. If I go back to builds in Buddy Build in a second here, we'll see that GitHub has said, hey, there's a new build that's available, and this build will get processed. In about 1.5 to 2 minutes, he's going to get an email that says there's a new build available. If we were using Slack, that's built-in Slack integration, you'll get a Slack notification. And he gets an in-app prompt. And so the problem that you really want to solve is making sure that Niels isn't giving us feedback on an old app, right? Not super helpful to get feedback on bugs that have probably been fixed. So hopefully that provides some context on how we're about to gather the data, or how we gather the data for what I'm about to show you. These are some of the companies who use Buddy Build every single day. So companies like Slack and Pocket, WordPress, Meetup, all kind of believe in this kind of iteration loop. And so it's literally thousands of teams that were able to gather the data. Some of these teams are pretty good at what they do. And so it's kind of interesting to see how these people work. And so we literally have everything from solo developers to kind of Fortune 100 companies who are using it, and that's where we've got this data first. So let's get into it. Where's the code is the first question. So we said, I think it was like 30, we say 40, 40, 20-ish. So we'll get to that in a second. But 95% of the source code that is processed through Buddy Build actually comes from a cloud provider. So GitHub has github.com, and they have GitHub Enterprise. Bitbucket has bitbucket.org and Bitbucket Server, or Stash is what it used to be called. GitLab is a lot more confusing, but they have both a cloud and on-premise version. If you take a look at what that decomposition looks like, actually pretty close to what was polled in the audience. And just over half use GitHub, 41% use Bitbucket, and 5% use others. So GitLab, Visual Studio Team, a whole bunch of other ones that we support as well. Of the common, like the kind of the self-hosted, 79% of people use GitLab as their self-hosted source code provider. As you think about kind of platform adoption, as teams develop, about 57% of them are developing for iOS, about 25% develop for Android, and 18% are using both. So everything that you saw in Buddy Build, even though it was an iOS demo, works largely the same for Android as well. If you're an Android developer, you don't have to do the code signing stuff, which most Android developers love. They get to hold over their iOS counterparts. So which iOS platforms? So it's interesting to see this data change over time, but Swift 3.0 plus is about 3/4 of the applications that you see right now. So people have really adopted Swift 3 pretty quickly. It's fascinating from a kind of heuristics perspective. We have dashboards that show us what compile times look like, and this is a huge difference. We would encourage you to upgrade to Swift 3. What are the minimum supported iOS versions? So this is iOS 6. Okay, I'm going to quickly go through because I think that's going to die in a second. iOS 6, iOS 7, iOS 8 is 33%, iOS 9 is 48%, and iOS 10 is 12%. I have no idea why it's doing that. This is kind of interesting. How many people use a watch here? How many people have an iOS watch? How many people have a killer app for their iOS watch? Yeah, what is it? Shopping lists. Most people say the watch face, just the built-in watch faces. But yeah, shopping list is great. It's about 3% of people who actually build watch OS apps. tvOS, how many people have an Apple TV? How many people have installed a custom app on their Apple TV? What is it?
It's just to watch TV. So
What's another custom app that people love on their TV? What's that? Plex. Yeah, Plex is one of Buddy Build's customers, as an example. What's that? Infuse. I'm not familiar with that one, so fascinating. This is where it starts to get religious, so I'm going to quickly go through these slides. Cocoa Pods are Carthage. So 66% of people use Cocoa Pods, 8% are Carthage, 23% are neither, and 2% are both. And those are always fascinating to me. I'm like, just choose one. And so what version of Cocoa Pods do people use? 1.1.1 is the most common right now. It's fascinating to watch this adoption curve over time. We're going to post on our blog actually kind of monthly updates across a bunch of these statistics so you can see kind of how these things change over time. This is always fun. How many people check in their pods folder versus not? How many people check in their pods folder here? How many people do not? How many people have no idea what I'm talking about? Cool. I can explain it later. It tends to be fairly religious, and it kind of shows. The data's actually gone more to people checking in their pods folder. This actually changes with larger teams. With larger teams, 61% of them don't actually check in their pods folder. When you take a look at the pods that are referenced, there's just under 2,700 different pods that people are using. Pods are used in more than 15% used in more than 15% of apps. Fabric, Crashlytics, Alamo Fire. The ones in bold are kind of the open source ones. Test-related pods, I think, is one of the things that we were talking about yesterday. What are the ones? So a lot of people don't use Cocoa Pods for their tests, but here are the ones that actually do use it. It's pretty funny. Facebook Snapshot Test is actually quite popular from a mindshare perspective, but in terms of adoption, it's still kind of growing. For the Android developers, the minimum supported versions for Android. I promise the slides didn't intentionally go out. Okay, I'm going to go very quickly. I'll read it out. If your API less than 15 is 6%, 15 is 55. This is the minimum supported version. API 16 is 21, API 17 is 3%, and greater than 17 is 15%. I'm happy to walk through this afterwards should we need to. Okay, don't move. I'll go through these very quickly. Commonly built Android versions. Here's API greater than API 22 is 1%, 22 is 46, 23 is 17, 24 is 9, and 25 is 27%. So it gives you some sense for where people are landing there. Do teams write tests? How many people who write tests for your iOS or Android app? Impressive. Interesting. How many people do not? How many people still don't know what I'm talking about? Okay. 61% of people, which is actually representative of what we see here. There's a common misconception that people don't write tests for their applications. Actually, a large majority of people do. What percentage of code coverage do we have? That's data that we'll talk about later. But people do write tests. Android tests, 63% of those people do not write tests. If you're an Android developer, you're a bad person. No, not at all. It's just data for what it's worth. Native versus hybrid, super fascinated here. When I talk about hybrid, I'm talking about React Native, I'm talking about Ionic, I'm talking about PhoneGap, Cordova. 90% of the apps for iOS are using Objective-C or Swift. 10% are hybrid. How many people have used React Native here? Interesting. For the benefit of the audience, I think it was like probably on the order of 15 to 20 people. So on Android, 90% Java, 10% hybrid, same number, which is kind of interesting. 68% of apps that were hybrid are using React Native. This is probably the largest delta change month by month that we see across almost any metric. So it's pretty fascinating to see the adoption of React Native. How many of those apps go to production, is a very different question, but people are certainly kind of experimenting with it. This is kind of funny. 1/3 of the React Native apps also use Cocoa Pods, which hurts my head. The next question inevitably is like, how unique is my workflow? And so inevitably people think that their workflows are very, very specific and very unique to their teams, and that's often the case. In fact, it's about 14% of the time. So 14% of the time, there's some customization that you can go and extend Buddy Build to accommodate like kind of the complexity or the needs of your specific team or how you work. But 86% of the time, it kind of just works out of the box. You don't need to make any changes. The next question, so there's this whole custom scripting. Effectively, the way it works is there's a couple of entry points. You can write a shell script at those entry points and literally do whatever you want. And so you own the VM at that point. And so the question is, like, what do people do? Here's what those folks are doing. They're using NPM, they're using Fastlane, curling, taking files on and off the server, pushing them to various places. If you are intricately familiar with code signing identities, this is kind of an interesting one. What type of Apple accounts do people actually use? 73% of people use a company account, 18% use an individual account, and 8% are using enterprise accounts. And so I think I'm at time, and that concludes my talk. Thank you very much. Hope this was helpful.